Welcome back. Today we're going to talk about this book, the novel Afterlives by the British Tanzanian author Abdulrazak Gurnah, who was the winner of this year's 2021 Nobel Prize for Literature. And so funnily enough, about 10 years ago, I had very randomly read one of his books, which I picked off a shelf in a bookstore, thought, I wonder if this is any good. And so I was quite surprised at how good that novel was for a random pick in a bookstore. And so I was somewhat familiar with his work when he won the Nobel Prize, and I was curious to read one of his more recent novels, and this one, Afterlives, is, I think, his most recent one. So I was quite eager to discover it. So like the previous book that I'd read, and as I gather most of his bibliography, the setting for this book is firmly rooted in East Africa, specifically somewhere in Tanzania. It's never really specified where it is. It's not Zanzibar, it's not Dar es Salaam, it's somewhere on the coast of Tanzania, maybe near the border with Kenya, but it's never really specified. The point is that he really depicts a universe which is can best be described as a view of the Indian Ocean, of the Western Indian Ocean. It's really the nexus of East Africa, the Middle East, and India. And so there are characters like Gujarati traders, Middle Eastern businessmen, African spirit healers, and this whole incredible fauna of characters that really blends together in this beautiful rhapsodic sort of symphony. It's really very charming, and I hesitate to use the word charming because, of course, it sort of suggests that I and maybe other readers would fall into a sort of Orientalist trap where we sort of look at the beauty of these exotic people and just how quaint and cute they are. And of course, that's something to be avoided, especially given that the fourth participant in this wonderful symphony is maybe less wonderful, and that is the colonialist power. In this sense, the Germans, which were controlling this part of Africa, which they called Deutsch Ostafrika, German East Africa, which included not just Tanzania, but also Rwanda and Burundi. And this colonial regime of German East Africa was dismantled after the First World War when Britain and France defeated Germany. And so during the Treaty of Versailles, all these German colonial possessions, including this bit of the world, was given over to British and French mandates for better supervision, of course. So this is a book that starts off in the late 19th century, early 20th, before the First World War. And it's a tale of interwoven lives in a small town. And there are different people of different origins, and traders, and Gujaratis, and Africans, and they're all sort of mixing together, and so on and so forth. The thrust of the action is that there is a character who appears in town who is schooled in the ways of the Germans, and he has come to reclaim his long-lost sister. And so just as everything is about to be resolved happily ever after for this stranger who arrives in town, he decides to join a regiment called the Schutztruppe Askari, which was a sort of German African legion for local men to join the German war effort against the imminent threat of the British and French war. And so the Germans had sort of put together these regiments of local men. And so this young man joins the regiment, never to be seen again. And in a sort of parallel emerging story, another young man who's also of somewhat mysterious origin joins a similar regiment of this German Schutztruppe Askari, and is confronted to the daily brutal life of this regiment with attitudes ranging from casual, patronizing condescension all the way to full-on brutal racism on the part of quite cruel German officers. And so the question is, it's not clear what the connection is between these two characters. Are they the same person? Is one the reincarnation of another, as the title might suggest? And the answer to that is sadly not. That would be a very imaginative approach to the novel. And maybe here lies the greatest sin of the book. Basically, the book very much delves into the daily lives of this charming town, and it compares that to the brutal reality of this German regiment. But at all stages, it lacks a fundamental thrust and a fundamental driver for the story, any sort of plot or tension. And so you have a lot of sort of episodes of a local businessman who needs to hire a guard for his warehouse, and maybe there's going to be a shipment coming in and something, and then this local woman is falling ill, so maybe let's get a spirit healer. And you never really know where it's going. In fact, no, that's not quite true. You do know where it's going, and it's sort of quite easy to anticipate a lot of the advances in terms of how the characters are going to meld together. But there's nothing very much at stake. Of course, when the war breaks out and these young Askari men are led to fight, there is a level of brutality and a historical overview of the brutality of the colonial regimes of the region. But it's sort of flown over quite quickly. And that's something where the historical dimension is maybe a little bit lost when focusing too much on the micro elements of the characters' lives. And so a lot of the time I'm thinking, why do I care? I sort of know what's about to happen. This is going really slowly. I really want this to accelerate. And the worst thing is that it starts to accelerate really very noticeably in the last 30 pages. In the last 30 pages, one of the characters suddenly gets his life into gear and starts doing all sorts of research and traveling to this place and speaking to this guy and finding this paper and then going to this other town and speaking to this other person. And suddenly there's a real thrust, but that thrust is sort of condensed in the last 30 pages. And you've just spent 250 pages waiting for stuff to happen and trying to understand what the stakes are and what's happening. And all of that is sort of really focused and concentrated in the last 30 pages, and you think to yourself, there's really an imbalance in rhythm here, that it took all this time to build all this scaffolding for the story and all this resolution to occur in the last 30 pages, and it would have made such a wonderful book actually to spread out this final acceleration throughout a whole novel and keep that tension going, keep the plot going till the very end, rather than have it sort of bubbling so quickly at the end. So I really didn't like that at all. I also didn't like that the mystery of these two different characters, who are they, how are they connected, is resolved in this very accelerated, breakneck pace sort of way. Just didn't make a lot of sense to me. So overall, I think this book would have done so much better if it had done two things. First of all, if it had focused on a certain thrust, and maybe that thrust should have been examining the historical horrors of the colonial regimes and these colonial armies in Africa, and the brutality of some of these regimes and the brutality of some of these regiments towards local inhabitants and to their own soldiers. That might have been one avenue to explore, or the connection between these two men. That might have been a really fun exploration as well, if it had been sort of more evenly spread out throughout the book. But overall, I just kept thinking to myself as I read this would have been such a beautiful short book. This could have been a 150-page, amazing book. Every sentence counts. Every single character, described in 4 lines, and with the reader left to imagine the rest. I just felt that the way this was presented, it could have been so much simpler. And so then I thought back to the book that I'd read 10 years ago, which was one of his earlier novels called Paradise by the same author, which had that sort of somewhat magical, quite short dimension. It was set in Zanzibar, and it had that sort of elegant simplicity to it, which is so difficult to write. I'm sure of it. But I think that this would have been, this story, this whole framework in this story, in the story of Afterlives, would have been so much better suited to a more simplistic story with a much more powerful moral message around colonialism, around lost connections, around afterlives, of how we reinvent ourselves amidst these brutal regimes. So I sort of recommend much more that earlier book, Paradise. I didn't love this one, Afterlives. I think if you're interested in colonialism or East Africa, sure, it's a good read, but it does plod on a bit, and it takes a little bit of time. I think what's interesting is that it compares in a way with a book that I read recently, which was called Frères d'âme by David Diop. In English, it was translated as At Night, All Blood is Black, which won the International Booker Prize, which was a story of a Senegalese soldier in a French regiment during the First World War in France, in the trenches, and his experience of that, and how his descent into madness brought up and evoked his childhood and his culture in Africa, in Senegal. And I thought that was so much more evocative and so much more powerful. And it was a short book, and it didn't need to be super epic, and it was just very strong in the way that it grabbed you and it brought you on this journey. So I much preferred that one, and I would recommend that book if you're interested in that aspect of colonial African history and how that was sort of connected to the First World War and the brutality of that war. Then that David Diop book, which I reviewed a couple of months ago, is a lot better. I'd love to hear from any of you if you've read this or if you've read any other books by Abdulrazak Gurnah. I think he's a very strong author, but this is probably not his strongest book. And I'd love to hear from any of you if you've read other works by him, which ones you would recommend first, what might be a better tack, and share that with the rest of us. Also, if you haven't subscribed to this channel, I would love you to. It would be absolutely amazing to have more subscribers, followers, comments, engagement. I'd love to chat with any of you about books and use this platform as a really in-depth conversation channel. Looking forward to hearing from all of you. Thanks a lot.